What I'm going to say is that I didn't want to take the agency of the players away from them once we had already gotten underway. There's nothing wrong with setting the stage. And oh, we got a Discord message here on over here. There's nothing wrong with setting the stage as a DM, right? Like when you start a new game off, you can have the players start wherever you want to, as long as you've discussed it beforehand and kind of have an idea. You don't want to surprise people too much. But if I gave them an opportunity to play on the ship and then took that agency back away to have them eaten, that felt like the wrong call. So I did the introduction that I did and then moved straight to this map here. And this has even quieter sounds to it. So then I put them in here. Now, this is the last place in the entire adventure where I have definitive knowledge of how the players are going to interact with my game. We had stuff over here. Let's close off this. This isn't necessary to be open. So I had 3 pieces of loot for this adventure and 6 pieces of writing available. Hype train. I don't know what that means, but that sounds amazing. Sounds great. Ooh. Oh, it's just re-announcing the 4 subs from earlier, I think. Either way, that is, and that I do understand, and that is great. We had these people. We put them inside the stomach of a kraken, right? And then I knew on this map, so I don't get to pick how the maps are designed. I just have to pick maps that already exist. But looking at this, I immediately knew that this chest, even if it didn't naturally attract player attention, I would make sure and describe it so that when the players got full control over their scene, they would immediately, well, not immediately, but at some point they would know that the chest was important. That allowed me to do 2 things, which was give them the radiation resistance potion. Also introduce them to the chest of anchoring, which is how this Kraken has died. And originally, journal entry 1 was supposed to be in this chest. Ooh. Oh, wow. Thank you for all of the gifted subs. Wow. That's amazing. Thank you. Buzz Lightyear on the rampage, it looks like there. That's amazing. Awesome. That's great. That really is great. Yeah, what we ended up doing was they actually kind of ignored the chest in the very, very beginning, which was not what I had expected originally. But at the same time, I also knew they would come back to it eventually. No adventuring party sees a locked or even unlocked chest in an area and doesn't think to themselves, I'd better get in there and take a look at it. So that's what ended up happening. Dominique, Essequa, Furlos, and Rivulet. Oh, right. So I also had an idea that there would be skeletons if they opened up the chest and they fiddled around with it. But those skeletons were probably going to resurrect no matter what originally. But they did open the chest and they pulled out the artifact that disappears into the air, and then the skeletons come. And that was a good transitional moment for that. The note ended up not being in the chest because in the moment, I believe while it was being explored, somebody came over here to look at this this cutlass in the stomach acid. Well, there's no stomach acid in here, but that's neither here nor there. And I thought to myself, there should always be... I wanted to reward player creativity in this particular moment. So I pulled the journal entry out and put it right there instead. And that actually ended up helping me out a little bit later on based on some of the stuff. But then we get this journal entry right here, which I put together and has information. There's a journal entry version up here. And then there's also down here at the bottom a plain text version. And this is just to sort of introduce players to both the idea of the setting, because the players had gone through the setting before. And when we talked about it in session 0, so I explained the setting to somebody, that's different than sitting down with them and having it happen to them in the world. So they picked this journal entry up that looks like it's extremely old. Obviously, it's talking about a city that doesn't exist anymore that fell 1,000 years ago. But it also mentions something that gives them context for the setting that they're living in, and that is a comics convention, which is an extremely modern concept. So they have already, just hopefully from this one mention of a comics convention, an idea that what the world used to be was close to a modern world. And of course, even with that said, that like instead of having a cell phone, he was using a sending stone. Or yeah, I appreciate that. I'm hope that's the hope for putting this together, is to kind of give people an idea of what goes on behind the scenes in the DM's heads. I'm not a big fan of the idea that I don't want to spoil anything. I want you guys to understand where I'm coming from and why I'm developing things in certain ways. The important thing, though, is after they get this note and after they read it, of course, they fight the skeletons. It's an extremely easy fight because this is their very first fight. It's just for the sake, really, of adventure pacing. The idea of getting into a fight immediately, you get to kind of break out, use your abilities in interesting ways, and then after you're done, you get to finish exploring the area. I knew there would be an opportunity. So if we look at the dynamic lighting for this map, which, yeah, the dynamic lighting is on. Let's take a look real quick at the dynamic lighting options here. Okay, so there's a lighting source at the end of this thing here. Everybody except for Essequa has dark vision. And overall, yeah, you can kind of see a little bit of a shadow here. Not much of one. But these players over here can't. So as a DM, it doesn't, there's not a very good shadow available right now. And I probably can fix that. It's actually not super important because this is the only map that uses dynamic lighting, I think, in the entirety of the adventure. Well, it's not, but there's one more in it. It's very easy. It's better to explain it than it is to do anything else with it. So right now their field of vision stops about here. Essequa actually has no dark vision, so without a light source, she's blind. And I believe when she picked up a torch, yeah, I made her emit light. But the idea is, since this is lit and this end isn't lit, the players would naturally be drawn to go out this way. And also describing this other end as intestines gives them the sense that maybe it's not the best place to go. Thank you, Buzz Lightyear, as well, for the bits. I had someone explain to me what bits were. A couple of yesterday or the day before that, I had to have someone explain to me how bits work, and I was like, "Oh, it's like for an MMO where you buy currency to buy things, except for Twitch and Twitch streamers." It's an interesting idea. Yeah. Oh, full. That's great. I'm glad this is helpful. I'm going to go through the whole thing, hopefully, here during this stream. So we'll get, and as we get further along, you're going to see that I have a lot less planned and a lot more improvised. And I'm going to tell you what I improvised out of just what players came up with on the fly and what I came up with on the fly. But this room I knew, right? This is the starter room. They only have 2 exits. They can go out the back end or they can go out the front end. Yeah. And I knew that the back end was going to require a small or smaller creature. And when we talk about small, we're talking about in the scheme of D&D sizes. Since everybody here is a medium creature, I think Rivulet is a medium creature, even though she is quite short. No one else would fit through here except for Snonky. I knew there was a possibility that they would want to send Snonky through it, so I did have some vague idea of what was going to be down that way, but it's just intestines. I probably would have given them some sort of a piece of treasure for exploring in that direction. I just don't know what. It would have been something random in my head at the time. But after they're done here, they leave, and they go to the outside of the Kraken, which is over here. Now, again, I have some control, right, over this map and this part of the setting. Now, we can zoom out because this is a very big map. I have some control over how this works. Because they're going to come out one way or the other. They're going to end up on this map. So, again, this is probably the last time I know fully where they're going to be going next. And Cassandra and Reginald were just based out of, and I can blow this up so you can see the token a little bit better. Honestly, I saw an interesting token. Let me move him. I can't really move it over all that well, but I saw an interesting token and was like, I want to use that. You know, it's a frog on, it's an old lady with a frog on her head, and the frog is smoking a pipe. I think it's possible. Yeah, I'll blew it up again real quick. I think it's possible that maybe the frog is supposed to be in control of the old lady in like the original concept of this as a creature, as a token in general. But I like the idea that they were just a couple of companions working together on something. And that's Reginald on top, and that's Cassandra on the bottom. And their story is just essentially that Cassandra and Reginald both washed up on this island around the same time. Reginald kind of went off and did his own thing for almost 10 years, including getting into some trouble, and then came back to Cassandra after the end because he was turned into a frog, and he knew she was a princess, and he was hoping he could get a kiss from her to get himself turned back, but that never actually happened for him. And Cassandra and Reginald are supposed to act as guide for the players to hopefully, because this is a designed adventure, I do allow a lot of freedom, and now that they're done with it, it's going to be pretty free for where they want to go next. I do allow a lot of freedom for my players. They could decide to swim out into the ocean and keep swimming until they get nowhere. They could do anything, and I'd have to roll with it. But Cassandra and Reginald were supposed to present a potential option for them to follow back to Frogtown and therefore back to plot. And of course, these players being good players, they immediately took me up on the option, discussed things with Cassandra, befriended her and Reginald, and then eventually followed her to the next map. They did go back inside looking for Captain Grug Grimtooth, who was in our little session 0 bit. They were on the boat with Grimtooth and Abelina. Now, Abelina, I knew where she was going to go. She was going to go west from here. I didn't fully know where she was going to end up yet. Not in session 1. But in Grug Grimtooth, I had always intended for him to be lost at sea. Maybe recovered by somebody else, maybe coming back into the plot at some point later. But I made the mistake of not making that very clear. It felt that it was one of the big mistakes in session 1 for me, was that they spent a very long time worried about where Grug Grimtooth was. They went back into the Kraken. They thought about trying to dive into the intestines of the creature, looking to see if maybe he had been partially digested. They asked Cassandra like 5 different times, even as the conversation moved on, if she knew where Grug Grimtooth was. And I didn't pick up on it until a little bit later, and then I started realizing, oh, wow, they're spending a really long time on this. And yeah, he was never supposed to be important element of this adventure. He was always just supposed to be the guy that was in charge of them and that they lost sight of when the adventure begins. But they go from here, following Cassandra and Reginald over to Frogtown because Abelina has traveled west in the direction of Frogtown. And when they also go west in the direction of Frogtown, they go to here. Now, there was, obviously, I've got these on the DM layer. You can kind of see them vaguely over here in the side. These are all of the tokens that they had available to them. There's also here Frog in a Wizard Hat, Boglep the Small, Steve, and of course Cassandra and Reginald again. And this was to introduce the players to the conflict, the primary conflict on the island, which is pirates versus bullywugs. Very, very simple narrative conflict that they could work together to try and solve. And they could have chosen to go with the pirates and work with them, or they could choose to go with the bullywugs and find out what their issues were. But the important part to me was that they had an option of some factional option in the adventure. But I knew where they were going to go. Like, not new, but like I was 99% sure they'd go with the bullywugs. They're not if this isn't an evil party, this is a very friendly, want to help people kind of party. And so they have this little conflict. We introduced them to Frog on the Wizard Hat, which went over great. I think his voice is sort of like, God, what's his, Jimmy Stewart from movies like It's a Wonderful Life. So he's like, oh, well, of course, my name's Frog in a Wizard Hat, and this is how I talk. And of course, Steve, Boglep the Small. To a degree, Reginald have basically just my tone of voice. Reginald's a little bit more, like, I don't know what the right word for it is. A little bit more noble sounding, because he is a noble. But Cassandra is just a traditional old lady voice, so it's like, hi, well, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Cassandra. And of course, we've got, in this setting, I didn't want to overload them with like voices and stuff either. So the only other speaking person in this is going to be Captain Colin of the Pirates. And he's just kind of a down here, sort of like a little rough and tumble. Give that sense that he is a little rough. And I need a drink of water after doing that. Choo choo indeed. And then I knew Furlough, see, you can actually see these marked. I didn't actually know if the party would pass by this area right here. But this was where the second, it's in the journal. This is where the second journal entry was. And this is where I was introducing the idea that they'd actually have to interpret some of these words. That there was something going on here, that there were words that didn't fit into modern language that they were used to. Every population, so this is extremely old. Every major population center has gone silent, one after the other. We're on our own. And then the transmuter. And if you'll look, this is a small detail, but for me it matters. Let's see, every major population center. We're in our own. Right. So we can look at the actual writing, and where the plain text version says transmuter is here, where it says Juriac. And down here, it says Lysel for the remnants button. Oh, we got more. Is there more bits? I think there's more. I'm not sure what's going on over there. Again, I apologize for not being like very Twitch savvy myself. Yeah, so the idea is, of course, that there are words in here that don't match up to common. So I wrote two different versions, put both of them, or put one of them with the words into a, there's an online thing where you can create parchment things. Oh, that's cool. Put it in an online parchment sort of thing that would let me create notes. And then I just literally went into MS Paint and cut around it roughly. Threw it into a file, and then I was good to go from there. Introduces the idea that they are things like, and we eventually translated these. It was reactor and spent fuel rods. And from a sense of the players, this gives them immediate concept that something dangerous is on this island. And it gives the players the idea of a modern concept. I've also been weaving... So... Lenore was mentioned in the last one as the automaton that whoever wrote these journal entries knew, and she had already left the island before. I've been weaving in Edgar Allan Poe references into the into the setting here. And one of them, I was going to have 3 of them. I only had to ended up with 2. I completely missed that I could have made Abelina, who flew away as an owl, fly away as a raven, and that would have been way better. But I screwed it up. So that was only 2 references. There's this one and then one near the end, or at least deliberate references. There might have been something I missed. But they, of course, decide, because they're a friendly, good party, to go with the frogs instead of with the angry, mean pirates. And then we took them to Bullywug Town. And that was the end of the first session. And at the end of the first session, one thing that stuck out to me, specifically Latia, because I asked at the end of my sessions, like, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What could be improved? And Latia came in with some useful feedback, which was that, and they all liked the session. They thought it went really, really well. But the feedback was, it felt like we were being led from one place to the other by the nose a little bit. Just introduced to a person and then introduced to the next person and then introduced to the next person, rather than naturally wanting to travel in those directions and not feeling as though they had a lot of like intrinsic direction to the adventure. And so that was something I kept in mind going forward. But there was also, it was that, and so it was intrinsic direction, and also ending on a cliffhanger. Like, moving to the Bullywug Town is great. Everybody wants to get to know the Bullywugs and everything. But at the same time, it is sort of an anticlimax. Now, I'm trying to make sure that the sessions end and have their breaks at good, well-defined times, just for player comfort and for your audience comfort as well. You know, be able to get up and get a drink, food, or use the restroom. So I was a little abrupt when we hit our timer, but it and I was, you know, they brought up, there's like, maybe we could have better sort of cliffhanger-esque endings. And when Latia gave me that information, I internalized it and hopefully moved forward doing that. We moved to this map, and this was something specific. Let's go to map tools, two back, because it doesn't start like this. It starts like this. Nobody's up here, and then they get to see the giant frog. Well, not see, but in their mind's eye, as I describe it, they saw the giant frog come in once they come up here to meet him, or meet her, I should say. And in my original conception of this scene, not the, this was like session 1 stuff, they would find the journal, or one of the persons with a high passive perception would spot the journal in this little log here, or pushed up against the log, right? That didn't quite seem like it worked for me when the session got underway. So they meet, let's go here. They meet Meg. At the time, they just know her as Big Frog. Oh, nice. Perfect basic username. I'm glad this is interesting enough to listen to. So they listen, or they talk to Meg Frock, and she is so she's a voice I like to do for certain characters to kind of give like that excited sort of, oh my God, hi, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Sort of like a Brooklyn-esque accent, but like very excited and again happy to meet people. And what I ended up doing was they immediately complimented her little flower hat. Which for me wasn't the thing I thought they would focus on. But as soon as that happened, I think it was Dominique made the comment. I was like, well, Big Frog here's gonna trust these people immediately over the compliment, and that immediately gave me a better sense of who Meg was. Meg being Big Frog here. In that she is quick to trust and all these other things. At this point in time, Reginald, the Frog of Holding fella that's traveling with the party currently, was not fully fleshed out. And I decided in the moment a fully improvised line, which was when they brought Reginald up and was like, hey, Reginald, do you want to say hey? And then Meg said something extremely sort of like hi, how you do? But it was very awkward. Their conversation back and forth was very awkward. And that got the wheels turning in my head for the relationship of Reginald and Meg, and that they had a past relationship and that it had gone badly and so on and so forth. But that was until the players introduced that character to her, that didn't exist. That was fully in the moment, but it was developed later on because once it happens in game, it exists. That's always the way I say it. Until something happens in game, even if it's in my head, it doesn't exist yet. That wasn't even in my head, but once it does happen in game, then it's real. Then it has become real. And so these players basically gained Meg's trust immediately. So she brings in her. Let's see if I can right click properly. She brings in her dad. And I did have a sense of who this guy was. This is Bagger Frog, Bigger Frog, and he is the half of the island that they are standing on currently. And all the frogs, from Frogtown are from here. And he is an Oath of the Ancients paladin who has lived for a very long time because he has passed level 14, which is when they get the immortality. And I had this idea in my head that that bullywugs and frogs or I should say bullywugs specifically, grow bigger the longer they live. So anyone with bullywug descent, anyone of bullywug descent would get bigger and bigger as they live. And of course, he's been around for 1,000 years, so he is massive. Right. Well, I mean, it's one of those things. Yeah, that is absolutely true. That's a good way to put it, because once you say it in game, it not only exists for real for everybody else, but I mean, like, they put it in their notes or they put it in their head, right? They know what that's going to be. Oh yeah. Also, I've been mentioned. I should have mentioned this before, but these maps are all Shea and Peku currently. All the tokens are Greek 4-6, and the music is by Tabletop Audio. Just to say that in voice as well as in the descriptions of the channel. But yeah, so they do this. They talk to him. It's a long conversation, and they dive really, really hard in on the science fiction concepts, the radiation, the reactor, the spent fuel rods, all the things in the notes. And at that point, they have gone in a direction already that I was not originally expecting them to go. I thought maybe they would interface with the adventure on a more surface level, like, there are bullywugs and frogs that need to be saved, let's go save them. But they were extremely curious about the reactor, and he has all the information, and he has no reason not to give it to people, except for the fact that explaining a nuclear reactor, we're going to use nuclear reactor as an example, but explaining a nuclear reactor to somebody who, for example, has never heard of it as a concept and doesn't understand it would be a useless endeavor. So he talks about it in vague terms, like there's a curse on the other side of the island that can kill you if you're around it too long. But as they dived in more and more and made it clear that they're because they had made checks to interpret what was going on in the they had made checks to interpret what was going on in the notes, and to fully interpret the words that they normally wouldn't be able to understand because they don't exist in modern parlance. What that meant is that he could impart to them the knowledge, and they could then filter that knowledge through, because obviously as players they understand. They're not super complex concepts, but they could filter that knowledge through their players. Now, I would say something that may be shocking, but the idea of it being a divine twin reactor, where you take two gods of opposing sort of like stances, like a goddess of sadness and a goddess of happiness. You put them in a box, they generate energy. Was only vaguely constructed in my head, not definitive. And this is another example where now that it's set in game, it exists. And it was based off the fact that they got way deeper into the weeds on the reactor concept than I had ever expected them to get into. So I had to have specifics available to me, and I just... the world itself, technically, is about 4 years old now. I had an old home game. Yeah, and by the way, if you guys have questions as we're going, please ask. Maverick 2 is asking, how long have you been developing this world? Again, the world is about 4 years old. I wouldn't say it's been constantly developed all this time. I had a 3.5 year long home game that was set in this world as a starter that really helped me formulate how the world exists and works. I have another home game. That one has finished. It got up to level 20 and finished. I have a different game with different players set in a different part of the world than the first one was, that has helped me develop that area. And this, again, is a third different area that is being developed as this game world. Does that kind of answer the question? I think it does. But it hasn't been consistent. It's mainly just... Oh, no, yeah. No, that's great. It hasn't been like a focused sort of world building exercise, because that's not how I do things. I world build through player interactions and improvise on the spot, and then work that into what exists already. I have a better memory than most people. No one has an eidetic memory. That's not a real thing. No one has a photographic memory, which is what an eidetic memory is. None of those things are real. I have an exceptionally good memory, though, so most of the details stay in my head except for names, dates, and numbers. But the narrative of a thing and world-building details stay in my head outside of those specific problems. Let me get a drink of water real quick. All right. The twin reactors, completely made up on the spot. Well, not completely made up, but like 90% made up on the spot. And how it would work and how these other things I started having to really consider. And later we'll explain even more how that ended up becoming not a problem, but a thing that needed to be considered. And then I just decided to have him give them the third journal entry. And at the time, I was not 100. I was like 50-50 on who the journals belonged to. But with the way they were talking about it and the amount of detail that he dived into on the reactors, I decided he was the originator of the journals. So he ended up asking them to recover his journal entries and his journals in general. And then from here they go to what I just love to use as a map is this bar right here. There are many iterations of this that Shay and Peku have created, and every one of them is stunning, right? I am going to turn that down a little bit. That is a little loud for me. And it's a little bit there. Oh, yeah, okay. Are you writing notes afterwards? I do not. I personally do not take notes at all. Yeah. I don't know if that... I know that's probably kind of weird. But I just rely on my memory for everything. And so far, it's worked fine. There was one moment in, I think, our third session where I had forgotten a thing of it wasn't super important, but it was something that I had forgotten and the players remembered because they had it in their notes. But I think one time out of 3 sessions, not that big of a deal. But yeah, so that takes them to here. I think they're on the token layer properly. I did not have this character named. I think, what did I end up going with? Oof, I don't remember off the top of my head. See, this is what I'm talking about. Names. Awful. Well, the interesting thing about... The good thing about this is, since it's a streaming game with a VOD, I can just go watch that if I have anything critical that I do remember. Like, right now, if I needed to remember the name of this this moth, I can just go back to the VOD and watch what I called him. Called her. And go from there. This was supposed to be the natural middle point in the adventure. I expected the adventure to take 2 sessions. It ended up taking 3 sessions. This was my expected middle point, where they would come here, they would rest, and then they would go out and they would finish the adventure. But it took them a while to get here. So instead of pushing them through this in a sort of quicker way where they get in, get a few drinks, have some conversations, that was always the intention, but kind of quickly wrap it up and then move on. And and then or not move on in the session. Instead, I gave them a lot more leeway to discuss amongst themselves and to interact with the world that they're in. So we've got, and also I brought in Frog in a Wizard Hat and Reginald to hopefully, if they had like questions that they were going back on in a circle on, that's a good thing to do as a DM. Have mostly silent NPCs sort of near the players interacting with each other. And don't interrupt their conversations with each other unless it's absolutely necessary or you see them spiraling. Players do this all the time where they'll ask a question and then because this is how conversations go. This is just natural conversational, how conversations naturally go. They'll go in a direction and then they'll forget that they already answered a question and they'll come back to the important, or they'll forget they didn't get to answer a question because they don't know the answer. So they'll come back to it and start over again. And then they'll start to spiral into let's come back to this question. Okay, well, then they get off on a side topic, and then they come back to that question, and they come back to a side topic. You can prevent that level of frustration by having a silent but knowledgeable NPC nearby who can give them some direction or insight. Maybe not the answer, sometimes the answer, but just some direction or insight to move them along naturally because they're there in the scene with them. But mostly I like to keep those NPCs quiet unless they're directly addressed by the players, or again, there needs to be something inserted into the conversation to kind of help it move along faster. And they didn't really need much help at all in the conversation. There was a point where I had Frog in a Wizard Hat pass out on the table, and funnily enough, that was an intention by me to move us to the mid-game break, to give the idea that, oh, he's out of it, he's already tired and everything. And what ended up happening instead was they started trying to look at his wizard hat. They wanted to examine him and his wizard hat. I need a drink of water real quick. Hey, desk. Yeah, so they started examining him and his wizard hat, and that actually took extra time. But they did get to break about 15 minutes late. Again, I was trying this time around not to push too hard to that and leave it in a natural breaking point. From here, they go to bed, they get their long rests, and then they leave again. Now, I had already set it up so that when they went back to the Bullywug town here, that they wouldn't be re-meeting Bigger Frog because they had spent so much time mining Bigger Frog for information. So in the morning, he needed to be unavailable. They just got the thing, and nobody else has anything other than this is the location you need to go to find the lost frogs and bullywugs. Go get them, right? Let me crank this up a little bit more. And so that was that plan. Now, I will say, anyone looking at this map or map list here for Mount Chicken Island may notice that this map here, the Swamp Liminal Space, didn't get used. Because I was looking at the time left in the particular session. They'd spent an extremely long time in the tavern, and there was originally a liminal map here that they would be traveling along. And this is actually on the DM layer, so they don't see it immediately until I decide that I want them to. And they would have to navigate this to get up to the canoes that they ended up using. But I had realized they'd spent so long, and for another reason too. At that particular time, we were still working through some technical difficulties on Jennifer's side of setting things up, where Roll20 was really, really lagging Jennifer's camera. It wasn't working right. And that's fine if we're not in combat, but you kind of have to have the virtual tabletop up in a combat. And there was a combat here. We ended up getting that worked out by the third session. But in the first and second sessions, it was a little bit of an issue. And you can kind of see it in the thing if you're curious. You go back, you watch the first session, you'll see it's a little, Jennifer's camera is a little jerky a little bit. The idea was that they would go up here, they would have to make it across this gap, or go down here and just say screw it and go through the woods and everything. And in doing so, that they would disturb this guy here, who was a Blight Beast. And it was a decent fight. I mean, not a high AC, obviously. He's got a 13 AC, but a decent chunk of hit points to have to run through. And also that they would get, if they defeated it or if they didn't defeat it, they also could get Journal Entry 4. Now, that ended up not happening. I completely skipped this map because of timing, because I didn't want to go into a combat with somebody who was having trouble with Roll20 that week. So instead, I moved them directly to, and we'll do this real quick, this map. And it's, of course, greatly changed since the actual thing here. Also, here's a note. Yeah, they started at level 3, and now they are level 4. Fuel Oops asks, can we know what levels the characters are? And that's the answer. They used to be level 3. At the end of session 3, I moved them up to level 4. And I was going to actually talk. That's a good intro. It's a good segue into the thing I was actually noticing I hadn't mentioned yet, and that's their stats. So we look at their stats right here, and you might be like, what's this top thing? What's 0 out of 10,000 for? Well, Roll20 doesn't do a very good job of keeping track of verticality. So I decided to, a lot of times, on NPCs it's different, because I can better understand what their verticality is, but I like having this for the players. So for these guys, it's their hit points, their AC. I'm pointing at the screen like you can see me, by the way. Let me just do it with my mouse. That's a hit points of 11. That's a AC of 16. And that is an insight of 10 and a perception of 12. Now, it's passive numbers. What that does is it helps me know, like, if the players are sneaking by and they roll an 11 on their stealth check, passive perception of 12 catches them, right? So that I know just on observation. In combats, for players and player pets and stuff, this is for verticality instead. It's still hit points and AC, so you can see their hit points and AC and everything here. But if they want to go 15 feet into the air, now I know how high in the air they are. This person isn't sitting on the ground. They are 15 feet above the air. They're flying. And that helps with the fact that, again, maps are not Roll20 virtual tabletop isn't extremely good at determining, verticality. I kind of wish that there was a fourth field, because I would love to be able to have both insight, perception, and their verticality down. But I'm working with the tools I got, and I get 3 fields, and that's it. It would be useful. I mean, I could do things like having their AC worked out, but like, for example, Essequa, I should have 15 and 20, because not 15 and 20, 15 and 18, 15 and 19 maybe now, because when Essequa is blade singing, Essequa's AC goes up. Yeah. Well, you never know. 10,000 might be necessary. It's probably too much, I know. It really is too much for the sake of combat. Nobody's going 10,000 feet in the air. In fact, I probably should knock that down to 1,000. I don't really see much reason to have it 10,000. Either way, the point is, yeah, it's just an easy way to keep track of that. So they move on to this map here. There are dead bodies everywhere. And from this point, we transition from session 2 to session 3. Oh, well, I appreciate that. It's a lot of DMing or damage when you fall. Thank you, a basic username. I appreciate that. I'm back. You've got some clever ways of thinking. Maverick 2, they're gonna want to yeet themselves or something that high. Yeah, that's possible. They're already. Rivulet is a tsunami druid. She is technically a water flavored fire druid. What are they called? Ugh, can't remember what that's called. It's the same kind of druid that Fern is in Critical Role. God, what do they call them? It's not just a fire druid. It's, you know what? It's not super important. It's a particular subclass of druid, and Rivulet is a water-flavored version of the normally fire version of it. And actually, I can tell you what their subclasses are, too. They speak about what their subclasses are. Rivulet is a druid warlock combination, which is an odd thing, but it works. Dominique is a Eloquence Bard. Furlos is a Tempest Cleric, and Essequa is a Blade Singer Wizard. Wildfire, that's the one. Yeah, we switched Wildfire out for Tsunami, or I should say, Rivulet switched that out, and that was the... and it works as a Tsunami Druid. They come here, and then we transition from session 2 to session 3. And by this point, Jennifer's worked out the problems with Roll20 and a little bit of chaos. The problems with Roll20, so combat is not going to be an issue. So then we basically dive into combat. Now, we do... I had always intended for Cayman and Kess here, because they are immune to poison, to be also immune to the radiation, which is radiation poisoning. And there's a reason for that, lore-wise, that will eventually be talked about, probably in-game, maybe, question mark. But I'd hate to say it now and then change it later because it hasn't been said in-game yet. But they happen to be immune to radiation poisoning. Colin is a dwarf. Dwarves are resistant to poison, but not immune to it. At the beginning of the 3rd session, before the beginning of the 3rd session, I did not know where Abelina fit into this. I had originally, so this is an interesting thing. In our session 0, I set Abelina up to be a villain. However, I didn't want to, it wasn't one of those things where I like immediately jumped into it. Like she didn't immediately like attack the players or something like that. But she was, she ran away from a combat, left the players to die, and was just generally very, and as her description, she was only able to attend the school because her father was governor of Avalon and forced her into the school. So they were supposed to, this is me thinking that this would work, they were supposed to think she was a person of privilege who was a coward. It is not very hard for the players to immediately jump to, and I don't like that person. However, this party is endlessly supportive of everyone. And immediately we're like, it's going to be okay. Everybody gets scared the first time. And like, we're so supportive of her that I had to be like, she's not going to be my first act villain. Or not even close. I don't think she would have been first act villain, but like she was going to heavily feature as a villain in this adventure. So I just took her out of that. But at that point, I didn't have an easy place to put her in the narrative. I didn't want to default to the damsel in distress trope. That would have been very easy. She gets captured by the pirates. She gets taken to the pirate lair. So instead, I did a very similar thing mechanically, but for different reasons. And that is, she sees the pirates, she goes down and says hello, and they say, "Can you help us? People at our camp are dying from something, and we don't understand how. And you're a druid who could possibly heal them." And so she goes with them voluntarily to help. Now, this didn't come up in game, but I feel comfortable saying it. When she shows up, she is the first truly born Avalonian or Brescian to be near this reactor. And Peak, the guy in the one of the guys in the reactor, there's Peak and Patience. These are the two opposing gods that are generating power. Peak wants to destroy the Kasari Empire. As far as he's concerned, the floating cities of Brescia, which is not floating now, and the floating city of Avalon, which is also not floating now, are cities of the Kasari Empire. And he can tell, because he's a god, that they are from these locations. She shows up, and his rage goes into overdrive because he detects a true-blooded, born Avalon resident above him. Because remember, Abelina's father is the governor of Avalon, so she was born there. The rest of the students were not born there. Dominique was born in Brescia, which is another thing of its own. Furlos was born in the southern continent. Rivulet was born under the ocean as well. Essequa was born on the northern continent. So these all people come from completely different places. And the pirates, as far as I'm concerned, none of them came from Brescia or Avalon either. So until Abelina got there, he was mostly under control. There was still a radiation leak because they damaged the reactor and all these other things. Once she arrived, it kicked into overdrive and basically killed everybody. almost everybody. Most of them had already been weakened by radiation exposure at this point, so it didn't take much more to knock most of them to unconsciousness and then eventually to death. And the only survivors being Cayman and Kess, who are immune to poison, the dwarf, who was resistant to poison, and inside the ratkin, who was being administered and healed directly by Abelina. And since Abelina had just gotten there, she wasn't irradiated to death immediately. She still had an opportunity to survive. So this is very, very intricately detailed, way more detailed than it needed to be. Players never fully uncovered that as a motive, I don't think. And then they go inside after defeating Colin, which was never meant to be a difficult fight because he is extremely sick. So then they end up going inside to here. And they start exploring. Now, this bit over here being a latrine is something that I had planned from almost the very beginning. That the fact that that's where the journal entries were coming from. And I say almost the very beginning, because in the very beginning, it was planned that it would be a note. Say that in the very first map, when I was talking about that earlier, I said the first journal entry was supposed to be found inside the chest. I'm going to take a drink of water real quick. I'm wondering if the only reason you can hear the audio faintly now that I'm thinking about it is that it's coming through my headphones and being picked up by the microphone. That's possible. Suddenly hits me. But what ends up happening is that Dominique searched the cutlass that was on the ground instead of the chest, and I said that the paper was found there. So no longer was it part of loot that these guys had stolen. They had 2 ships. They had another ship that was eaten by the Kraken. That was the one that had the chest of anchoring in it and a couple of other artifacts. They only recovered a little bit of stuff out of it because most of the stuff either went through the digestive tract or had fallen into the ocean and just been lost. But since it was no longer in the chest, it wasn't something that they had treated as though it was valuable. The stuff in the chest was supposed to be stuff that they could take to they could take to a port. They could sell it for money. They weren't considering the journal entries valuable. So at that point, I changed my tactic a little bit and decided that they had decided that the journal entries, which couldn't be soiled, made for good toilet paper, and made it as a latrine over here. I also knew that would be something that Essequa would tweak onto and find interesting. Well, interesting is a operative term here. I didn't cover this before, but they also found in that chest the refulgent flask, which originally said, when imbibed, this potion will provide you with immunity from the curse of Mount Chicken Island for 48 hours. I changed it to 24. But eventually they, got so dived in on the technical nature of this adventure that I decided to go ahead and just change it to radiation and poison, because they already knew what it was. Another important factor here is, and we're going to go look at the maps real quick, is that this reactor control room originally didn't exist. It didn't exist until session 2 was over. And I had time to reflect and be like, originally the reactor was going to be much more fantasy coded. It was just going to be like a pool of water with some crystals and some other stuff going on, because I didn't want to shock the players or the audience with a dramatic shift into science fiction, right? But the players had spent so much time talking to the Bagger Frog, talking to Bagger Frog, examining the notes, getting a firm grasp on the radiation, the technology, and all these other things, that it made sense at this point to allow for a science fiction map. Now, this one is, I believe this one is by, I can't remember if this is an 8-fold paper map or a Luke Stratton map, but the important part is, both of these maps come up on the ship over here, for example. This one that's on this entrance map was definitely an Limithron map. This is, I think, is a 8-fold paper map. Once I knew that they were going to be able to, it wouldn't be a dramatic shift in tone, both for the adventure party and both for the audience, I knew that I could bring them here. Oh, that didn't move. I don't know how well you can hear, but this audio here specifically, and this audio specifically here has a little bit of a noise in it that kind of sounds like a siren that kind of goes in and out and in and out. Excuse me. The players, so I used this, I blocked it off with, Roll20 lets you block things off with lighting, so I blocked them off with lighting into this room here, and treated it as though it was a small, closed-in, there it is. Blocked this off, made it an elevator for them, and then gave them the opportunity to interact with the elevator's artificial intelligence. Another drink of water real quick. I was not 100% sure how I was going to do this map exactly, but eventually I settled on this version of the map. There are many different iterations, the water being different colors. A lot of different things can be happening on these maps. That's how they work. You can better see on this map the little circular bits where their lighting is, because I unfortunately didn't move. Let's see, is this on the GM layer or the map layer? Yeah, I moved this, I guess, to the token layer. What is this yellow thing? Gosh darn it. Yeah, it's on the token layer. This should have been on, I moved it, I had it right the first time around. It should have been on the light layer. So that closes this off, and they can't see out of it currently. And they can't move out of it either. There's movements limited as well. So I could use this little small section down here. Let's use my mouse so you guys can see what I'm pointing at. Use this little tiny section down here as an elevator until they get to where they're going, and then the platform opens up. And at that point, I go in. Let's take the dominant layer stuff off. At that point, I turn this dynamic lighting off, and they have access to the whole map. It's a very quick way to deal with like an elevator situation. So they go, and they start moving around. Now, I'm going to let you guys in on a secret that don't tell anyone. When they got here, the only thing I knew for sure about how the divine reactor worked was that there were two gods that were fighting each other in a box. That's it. Every single bit of world lore or world building that came out of this particular room, and there was a lot, was either developed on the spot by me in a way that I thought fit what they were asking me of, or came from the player's own suggestions or assumptions, and I just rolled with it. I knew that there were going to be 3... oh my god. That includes the idea that the left-hand console opens to the ocean, the water plane, that the right-hand console opens to the Feywild and runs the water through it to decontaminate it. Not an original idea that I had until we were already in the scene. Or that the middle... I think I did know that the middle one was going to be an interface for them to look at. I didn't know that the middle one was going to allow them to interface with the gods. That I knew. One of the things I'll tell you, as a DM, it's always a great thing to leave stuff open when it's possible, because one, your players will come up with amazing ideas, and if you can confirm them you don't have to say no. If you know already how this works, and they come up with some sort of a brilliant idea, you have to be like, well, that's great, but I already know how this works, and it ain't that, right? But if you don't necessarily have it fully confirmed and concrete in your head, you can really develop with your players instead of at your players. I'm not writing a book. D&D is collaborative fiction creation, and my players are working with me to create what we're creating. The story comes from their how they intend to play the scenes and everything. So I think speculation is great. If I see good, I'll tell you right now, I don't get an opportunity to watch the chat while the game is running, unfortunately. I think that would be a little too distracting for the way my brain works. But I do read the chats in the VOD afterwards, because I watched the game afterwards to see like what I did right, what everyone else was doing, to get a better sense of Godzilla comes out of the pool. So if somebody has an idea that I think would work in the chats, and it hasn't already been like, decided that was wrong, or it could be worked into what already has been said in game, I'm liable to use it. I will always listen to good ideas from other people, no matter what. But yeah, so they come up here, and all of this, everything that happens up here is essentially off the top of my head or their heads. But I also have to... There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a very good way to play D&D, but it also has to seem like it's not off the top of my head, right? It has to, in the moment, feel like it's planned that way, that it's been discovered, not created. Yeah, that's very, very true. But I mean, theories are fine, although the other players do watch the chat, so like, it is a possibility that somebody could be spoiled on something, I guess, but I think we've been okay so far. If it turns into a problem, I'm sure someone will talk to me about it, and or the moderators will start watching for it. But yeah, we get into here, and pretty much everything we do is... So my Penguin Empire waiting for the world to cool down before... It is... Honestly, I'm not... That's the kind of thing that could integrate into the campaign from a later date, for sure, Fuel. I thought about the idea of there being like... So to the north and south of the game map are ice plains that just go on forever. There could be a Penguin Empire out there in the snow that nobody knows about. Could be fun, actually. No, and I also had them interacting with the reactor core. Now, figuring out how the reactor core was supposed to look. Yay, it's not an impossibility. One thing I liked about this audio, again, I don't know how well you can hear it, but this audio specifically has some clicks to it. And those clicks really work for me because this is supposed to be dangerous and radioactive. So giving even the impression of a Geiger counter is really useful. The players end up looking in here, and I will say real quick, this is something I talked to Jennifer about. The logo on the side of the reactor core here is just on the map. I don't get to make these maps. I'm choosing these maps to fit in with what I'm creating. So that's there, regardless if I want it there or not. So when the players asked me in the moment, what is that? And I very confidently said, oh, that's the LiperCorp logo. Okay, now that's true. That was completely, I said it very confidently, but that was a lot of these things I have time to think about as I can see them coming up as questions. That was not a question I saw coming up at any point. I didn't have any thoughts on what that was until the question was asked, and I had to just in the moment be as confident as possible. I said it's the LiperCorp logo, and that's now the answer to that question. Well, it's an interesting thing because it's obviously it's obviously atom right? Like it's an atom looking thing with like electrons surrounding a proton, that kind of stuff, which works for what we're doing here for sure. I saw that before we started, and I thought, that has the vibes of it being nuclear in concern. And so I looked at it and was like, yeah, absolutely, that's what that's going to be. This isn't too loud for you guys, right? Because it's extremely loud in my ears. I assume you still can't hear it. We'll see if anyone chats. Anyone answers me in chat real quick. Has Dr. Manhattan one of the gods? He could be. You're not hearing anything else. Okay, cool. So actually, if that's the case, let me turn this down. If you guys are just basically not hearing anything, then this doesn't have to be so loud in my ears. I turned it up because you guys, I wasn't sure if you guys could hear it at all. It's unfortunate. I really like Tabletop Audio's audio. I think it really adds to the game. We haven't, in the 3 sessions we've been going so far, been able to really have it play to the point where people can really hear it clearly. And that bothers me because I picked them out very specifically. They were very specific choices. That's fine. Every map had its own audio track. You couldn't hear it at all, I think, in session 1. Although in the edit, I put it in myself. The session 2, I don't think it's in at all. And then session 3, it's there, but very, very quiet. We're going to figure that out, though, so that's not a huge deal. So I wanted the players to be able to look down on this, and the Magitech that the players were playing with, like, obviously everything about this is technology and magic married together. So I had in my concept of this the idea that there was like a permanent familiar stuck in this room, like maybe an octopus or something. There's a permanent familiar stuck in this room, made to be immortal, whose main job is to just act as a surveillance camera that when you interact with the console, you can see through, right? And then being in the room with the gods gives you the capacity to speak with them. Give me a second. But also to the idea that there's significant weathering and damage to this room. This looks like a cliff face almost, and it shouldn't be. It should have been, shouldn't be, being in-game, in-universe. This should just be flat, and there shouldn't be leaking radioactive material everywhere. This should just be a flat thing that this is sitting on, where it accesses everything. But it's been in here for so long, and it's been damaged over time a little bit before the pirates even got there. But then the pirates literally came in and broke chunks off, like here, and at the top of this thing here. Oh, absolutely. See you later, a basic username. So the players came to this place, and then they looked in, and then I could give them the interactions with the gods properly, and that gives me, the crazy sort of peak fella. And I always intended for patience to not speak until addressed, which the players picked up on almost immediately. But yeah, they talk to Peak, and his whole deal is he wants to get back. He's been wronged. Remember, Peak isn't just anger. Peak is like irritation and annoyance at being wronged. So he is angry because they put him in a box for 1,000 years. And he's extremely angry. Oh, I will tell you another thing that came out of nowhere. I had looked at this map a dozen times, and for some reason it never occurred to me that there was a second pyramid here, or that the players would be curious what the fuck the second pyramid was for. And then it hit me when they immediately were like, hey, what's the second pyramid for? Yeah, I would be extremely angry too. Then they asked, and I was like, that's a spent one. That's one that had already been used up. They shrink down when they're used up. That's what that one was, and they never got rid of it. So that also but that defines a timeline. Because that means that if they didn't have time to get this out, then this one was new basically when the world ended. Which means that it actually can continue going on for a very, 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 very long time. Yeah, it's a green herring. I don't know why I didn't think about it. I should have planned something better not better. I think the solution I came up with was perfectly fine. Because it's actually kind of horrifying, the implications of they put 2 gods in a box and then they used up their energy so much that the box is no longer usable. Has its own terrifying implications. But regardless, what ended up happening here is that they backed in and out. They went in and out a lot of times. They found the manual over here. That was something I came up with based on what they asked for. They're like, is there a manual? I'm like, yes. And then they found it, and it was a 6,000 page manual. And then I'm like, there's no index. Great. So they were like, at first they're like, no index. Well, that makes this useless. And then they realized it was on a computer. so they could do a find and control F, like, hey, where look up the particular things they were looking at, which was definitely something I considered when I told them that it had no index, because it's on a computer. They could just search it. And then I kind of settled into this, and I was like, okay, well, first of all, I really, really wanted Rivulet to interface with the gods. That was important to me for a variety of reasons. So when they started talking about like how this system worked, I knew that I wanted to take Dominique out of the equation. She's the eloquence bard. She speaks to things and can't roll lower than a 10 on her persuasion, and I think her minimum roll currently at the time this was playing was 17 on deception and persuasion checks. She could not roll lower than that. Even a 1 becomes a 17. Now it's 18, I think. So I definitely didn't want Dominique doing it because that trivializes this encounter, or I have to set some arbitrarily high DC. So what I did instead was I forced it so that illusion magic had to be used on a different console. And the bard, being a bard, clearly had some illusion magic available. Divine over here for Furloughs, and then Essequa acting as the conduit to communicator to get these people to talk to each other. And of course, forcing Rivulet to take the opportunity as the only other charisma-based character, druid. I know that Rivulet is a druid, but Rivulet is also a warlock, so Rivulet is also capable in social situations, being the person to talk to and keep the gods calm. Now, once that happened, and Rivulet, and they were done because it went well. They did the shutdown process properly. They then, Rivulet decided that Rivulet wanted to kind of ask some more questions, even though the gods were really, really angry at the time, which gave me the opportunity to move them to this map, A Dream Within a Dream. And the god actually was talking to Rivulet many times, used the phrase, you are the dreamer. You are also imprisoned just like us. Which implies future things that I'm not going to get into here because obviously that would be spoilery. And then, of course, Rivulet is put into the dream. And I don't know why all of a sudden this is white instead of... It's supposed to apply dominant color for map layer, but it's just white. So we'll go with nothing and be dark at least. But putting the character in here, and we can zoom out so you can see the whole thing. Very pretty. Let's see if we can... Yeah, there we go. And that gave me the opportunity to introduce Rivulet to what is intended to be possibly a future sort of plot point. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but it was useful to make sure that Rivulet interfaced with the gods. I actually don't... I think it's a Hexblade, and... Hexblades are kind of one of those things where when you're a Hexblade, your patron could be anyone or anything that you choose, or nothing in some cases. You just have a weapon that is somehow connected energy to something more powerful, and that's how that works. But yeah, I was able to do this, which was kind of the final, really it wasn't the final part of the campaign necessarily, like campaign adventure or anything, but it was the last really important bit. They'd already finished up, so Rivulet experiences this weird dream sequence, and then they have to leave, go up the elevator, and then we go to ships right over here. We put them on the little Charity right here. I think that's going to be Ocean Sounds probably. Again, you can't hear it, so I guess it doesn't matter, but they escape, they go here, they do their things, and then, they bring Abelina with them, they bring the frog, they bring their new prisoners, they bring, technically they're bringing Cayman and Kess, too. So this boat's pretty overloaded, and then I'd already foreshadowed multiple times that some people were coming to save them. Actually, we should change this to Lessons Learned, because that is... Lessons Learned. That's the name of their ship now. So yeah, they also had some very strong foreshadowing that they were going to be rescued, or at least somebody was coming to rescue them from a different ship over here. And this is Frolaut, which is Furlous's brother, And then there's Charles Moriarty, who is good friends with Dominique and Essequa, I believe. I think Furlos is acquainted with Charles, maybe not necessarily they're good friends. I don't know Rivulet's exact relationship with Charles Moriarty, if there is any at all. But Charles is extremely good friends with both Dominique and Essequa. So when he heard that they were in danger, he teamed up with Furlos's brother, and they stole a ship. And a couple of his best friends came with him because they're his best friends. And this Elsbeth up here, who has a crush on Charles, also came along to help. And these are the 5 people who are coming to rescue them, even though they've already rescued themselves and stolen a boat. And that ends the adventure where they are. They're going to probably go back to Frogtown. There'll be like a little, probably not party, but like a little thing. And I'm going to bring these characters in as well. And there's also a pretty good chance, I'm thinking, because of how well everyone has reacted to Frog on a Wizard Hat, I'm guessing Frog on a Wizard Hat's going to ask if he can go enroll at the academy and travel back with them so that they can still have him around from time to time, because everybody seems to love him. And yeah, that's basically it. Does anyone have any questions at all? I'll give it a few minutes here. I mean, I got time, but if nobody has any questions, I could probably let you guys go. But yeah, as far as I know, yeah, I'm an open book here. So if you got questions for the DM, I mean, unless I think it would be spoilery, I will answer it probably. If you got questions about anything that's happened or anything that might happen in the future, or if you have suggestions, I'm always good for suggestions. All right. In that case, unless something pops up while I'm saying this, I think it's coming close to the end of the stream. I think this is a pretty good spot for me to stop. It's been a pleasure. I love all of the subscriptions and bits and everything. I know those are important. I might not know exactly how important, but I know they're important. And hopefully this stream, I mean, this stream wasn't perfect and everything because I don't know what I'm doing, but maybe I'll get better because I plan on doing some of these in the future as well. So your planning is more along the lines of themes for the players to explore. Yeah. And I mean, this was a outlined adventure, Fuel Oops. This was a planned adventure. I don't normally do that. Although I'm thinking about how this campaign is going to be structured. They have a magic school that, oh, you know what? As you guys can have a reward for actually being here and sticking around. Let me show off Valen for you, the school itself. You guys will see this in the next session, pretty sure. Oh, nice. So this is the Valen school. It is, in fact, a floating magic school. Right here. This is the portal in and out. They also could technically have an airship dock right here if they wanted to. And I'll show you also the lobby when you go right in, what it looks like. Give it a second to load. This is pretty big and pretty detailed. There we go. And yeah, so this has actually got dynamic lighting to it normally. You wouldn't be able to see everything under normal circumstances. And yeah, sorry, there was a question. Right. So your planning is more along the lines of themes for players to explore. Yes, to an extent. I prefer to let the players drive the story. So yes, there are themes and ideas that I'm always considering, and I'm also constantly navigating. It's like navigating a river the entire game, where I'm trying to keep an eye on the current and figure out like how to best make use of it. And for me, I prefer mostly nearly fully improvised game, with strong world building behind it. So rather than like you go into the tavern and you go into the tavern and this person is going to come up and meet you and say hello. I mean, that could happen anyway, but this person will come up and meet you and say hello and introduce you to the quest that you need to do. You go into the tavern, somebody comes up and introduces themselves and asks if you would like to have a seat, and then you sit down, and hopefully if you have a quest giver, and this is the DM's bane, but if you have a quest that you want the players to take, hopefully you have created the right circumstances for the players to interact with it on their own. It's like in the very first map when I talked about this, and this is extremely easy to do, and this is a good lesson, I think, for anybody who's trying to DM. But the Kraken stomach, right? Here? If you're in the Kraken stomach on this map, and it's really helpful. Now, I know a lot of people do it with descriptions, right? I prefer to do it with extant maps, and I think that actually helps me out quite a lot. But you can do it with description too. If you were describing this, right, you start with, you're in a stomach. There's no stomach acid. There's ship pieces everywhere. I'm going very quickly through this. There's some sort of giant boned creature that has died, or giant creature in here that has died and has been reduced to bones. And then you end on, and there is a chest. And you describe the chest, right? So if I have a plot hook, I put it in that chest. If I have people come into a tavern, and I want them to speak to a particular tavern member, first of all, describe it a little bit more. That's a very easy way to do things. There's Joe over here, and Joe is a orcish barbarian, or no, Joe is an orc wearing, with a big hammer on his back, and there's Jimmy, and that's a merfolk with a trident, and they are sitting together and they're arm wrestling, and then in the corner there is a man in a resplendent gown with all, jewels. It's so out of place in this tavern where it seems like nothing but rough and tumble types sitting in the corner, but no one is messing with them. And then the bartender is Joe, or not Joe. Who said Joe? But is Dan, and Dan is washing some cups. Anyway, what do you guys want to do? Right? You hope that they're going to be like, well, let's go talk to the fancy dude in the corner. You work that way with stuff. Definitely have themes in mind, and also like know who your characters are, but you want your let's put it this way. I feel it's best if your players are engaging with your world rather than your world is engaging with your players. Now, sometimes you can't avoid having the world come to them, but most of the time you want them to go to the world. So does that kind of make sense with that as a description of way I handle things? Like, for example, just show you real quick. We have the Valen School. Now let's go to the all. So, Fuel, this is my tokens page. This covers everyone in the school, right? I don't know how they're going to interact with the players, or if the players will ever interact with everybody here, right? But if they do, let's say a good example is Rivulet is being mentored by the philosophy teacher. GM notes right here. Professor Benjamin Whitaker, Changeling Valor Bard, thoughtful, calm. Jean-Luc Picard is the voice and the standing, so I can get into character really quickly when I click on it. Friends, Davelin, Druidess, Rowena Greenleaf. Romantic relationships, none. Rivals, Professor Amelia Rosenthal. They don't get along. And roll at the bottom, an old Kasari experiment. All changelings in this world come from old experimental stuff, just like automatons do. Every one of these characters has that blurb. So if I click on Kermos Koska, who is a Beholderkin, right? Each one of these has some sort of thing for them. So if they go to interact with this character, I know who the character is, but his reactions are wholly dependent upon how the players interact with him, I guess is the best way to put it. And that's not just true for characters, that's true for locations too. I know about the locations, I know the boundaries of the locations. I don't always know the whys of a location. For example, I've got these written down as, you know, for example, he's got an enemy, not rival technically, Astrid Montague and Kerman Koska do not get along. I don't know why yet. That can come up in conversation. The players could imply or assume things, and that becomes the reason. I just have it listed down. It's a little extra note for them to play with. So hopefully that answers in an even more complete way. Anybody else got anything else to ask, or they'd like me to expand on something I've already said? If not, we can go ahead and end this. I got the time. All right. I'll give it another couple minutes because I know there's a delay. All right, guys, it was an absolute pleasure, and if you want to see more, obviously it's Philosophy I Like. Thank you for explaining it. The game will be this Sunday, and I hope to see you guys there. Honestly. Oh, how long do you plan on running the campaign? The campaign is going to run for the ever, as long as the players still want to play. And I'll be keep DMing. I don't know if this campaign might end eventually. I don't have a plan for it to end. This campaign might come to a natural conclusion, and then the same players and me will have a new campaign in the same thing. That's the plan anyway. Since there's a question, someone has asked a question. Thank you for doing this. It's been educational and interesting. Absolutely, fuel. Is it fuel? Fuel oops? Am I saying that right? Yeah, I wish we had more other, because it would have been, I think this would have been more engaging with a second person at least. I think it was fool. Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah, that makes way more sense. I should have been saying fool in the beginning with. I kind of wish there'd been a second person here. I think this would have been a little bit more engaging with with one of the players to bounce off of. But at the same time, with Goblin Katie being, you know, really, really retired today, I thought it would just be best for me to do this alone. And also someone else who knows how to run a stream would have been great. I don't know what I'm doing here. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, especially to all of you who have subscribed. I'm going to give Buzz Lightyear, who I guess has... Hold on, let's scroll up here. Has gifted like 11 subs. That's kind of amazing. Thank you so much. Everybody else who's gifted or subscribed, love you guys. I appreciate it so much. And yeah, everything as far as I know, I mean, right now our first priority is, you know, improving our streams based on any income we get, or license or proper licensing. Yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah. Or getting licensing for certain things that we need to license properly. So like, yeah, subscriptions are great, and now that we're able to, you know, have subscriptions, it's even better. I appreciate you guys, and I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream now, which is gonna require me to page out into this, and oh my god, there's so many of me. Infinite me's. I'll see you guys later. Peace out.